So where did it all start for yourself?
Well, I was born in Balham Hospital, South London.
I know nothing about London.
Okay.
So,
South of the river.
right.
Um,
Rough?
Not at that time, very middle class at that time. Now it's become a kind of an immigrant haven. Clapham Common is a very large park south of the river in London. It's a kind of a large suburban park, and we lived on the street right next to the park, basically. Clapham Common, north side.
So you were looking over the park now?
Yeah.
So they must be worth it.
The house where we live now is worth more than $2 million.
Fucking hell.
And at the time we had it was probably worth, I don't know, 20,000
Did your father own that house as well?
He owned it, yeah. But he eventually sold it, and they moved out to Epsom.
House prices not as high out there.
Different kind of house, kind of a what they called a bungalow, just a one floor with a huge garden,
Yeah.
I mean, gigantic thing.
I
think that was worth quite a lot of money.
Did you not have the garden in Balham?
There was a front garden, not as large, and a little bit. Yeah, there was a garden out back as well. I've seen photos of it on kind of realestate.com.
Right.
It was a very impressive looking property, actually.
So most of the time you would be out over in the common then, yeah?
Yeah, I just I was only up to the age of 5, so I spent most of my time at home, and I went to a prep school which was across the common, I think.
No idea what a prep school is.
Like
nursery,
like a kindergarten.
Kindergarten, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got you. At 5-year-old, were you allowed to bugger off on your own back then?
Nah.
So
it was a big city. So,
right, okay.
I was under the watchful eye of my mother mostly, because my father was either working or off with his mates or playing sport or whatever he did.
So the hustle and bustle of London
Yeah.
would have reached your doorstep then? You could tell, you realised you were in a big city?
I was a busy street outside. You couldn't cross the street.
So even in this, late 50s, early 60s?
Yeah, well, you just imagine a large park, and there's a semi-main road on 4 sides, and that's kind of a bus route, and lots of cars trolleying up and down comes.
So it was a busy street? Your mum wouldn't have let you across that street unless
I would have had to be supervised to go across to the common.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a little story in the Across the Seas where my dad takes me across to the park and hides behind a tree.
Yeah, you were telling me about
the bastard.
Yeah. But then
I think I was about 3 at that time, because by the time I was 5, I probably wouldn't have been so scared. But at 3 years old, it's like, fuck, I've been abandoned.
When you told me that story a couple of weeks ago, I immediately went back to being in my front room in Bradford.
Right.
And my mum used to work early evening, so my dad would look after me. And I remember my dad, we were playing, and then he laid on the sofa and he pretended to be dead.
Oh, God.
And I was fucking checking him, crying. And it felt like it. I thought we're dead. And then he opened his eyes, and I was crying. He opened his eyes, started laughing. But that fucking sticks with me.
That sounds very much like my experience. I just remembered something, actually. Another scary memory, which I'm going to add to the story. We had a guy, Guy Fawkes.
Yeah.
You built a kind of a human-like figure, and guy, stick him in the eye, throw him on a fire, and make him die.
Yeah.
I might put that song in as well. I had a guy which we hadn't thrown on the fire yet, and he was in my room, and I remember I woke up one night and I thought there was someone in the room. I was fucking terrified.
And were you Guy Fawkes?
It was the Guy Fawkes. Yeah, I'm gonna put him in. Because I like the early childhood memories.
But it's fucking weird, the shit that sticks.
But they're often scary things.
Yeah.
Like the bear in the cave. That freaked me right out.
The dream.
I had it a few times.
Yeah.
And the colouring in the large brown space in my colouring book in brown.
Yeah.
Brown freaked me out.
Yeah.
I had a thing about brown.
But it's just weird, because since I've had kids, I'm trying to be careful about what I'll do with them.
Right.
Do you know? I won't scare the shit out of
Yeah,
me, 'cause
like
it's
don't-
fucking frightening.
Don't generate any
Yeah.
deep, frightening experiences that'll stay with them forever. That's a good policy.
But I want them. I mean, they've got it fucking easy compared to what I've had it, and
Yeah.
I don't know if your kids have got it.
Well, they
But-
still should face the world.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't put cotton wool around your kids and protect them from everything, because eventually they're going to have to go out in the big wide world
Yeah.
by themselves and deal with it.
But I was worrying about them not getting any struggle. But like your kids, because
Right.
I've got a boy and a girl, you've got a grown-up boy and a girl, but they've had the struggle going to school as foreigners, haven't they?
Exactly. Yeah.
So they're having a struggle that we don't see.
Yeah. I mean, both my kids probably had their share of bullying.
Yeah.
My daughter more than my son.
Yeah.
But yeah, I heard a little bit from both of them that they had a hard time with some of their friends.
I think it
So-called.
might be getting a bit easier now as time goes on.
Oh, definitely down here it is. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you're out in the countryside somewhere, you'd still be a square peg in a round hole. But here, I mean, this is very, very international.
Were
this
you
area.
down here? Were your kids grow up down here?
They were born in Zichy.
Right.
Yeah.
So they grew up.
And so they grew up here
Wow.
until Emmy was 14, 15 before she went to Australia, and Gino until he was 11, and then that was the divorce, and he moved.
So when
10.
when
When
your
he
daughter
was 10.
when your daughter went to Australia, she was 14.
She was 15.
Did you go with her?
No.
Who did she stay with?
She stayed with some friends of mine in Sydney, and
Wow.
she went to a local high school briefly, and then she went to the High School for Performing Arts, which is why she went to Australia, because she wanted to go to a music high school.
And she just had 1 year,
2 years.
3 years. So when she
3 years altogether. So it was a year of kind of regular kind of build up your English,
Yeah.
and then she got a place at the High School for Performing Arts in a city, Sydney,
Right.
and she stayed there for 2 years, and then when she came back to Japan, she came back with a job at Universal Studios, Harry Potter,
So
playing-
she's done all right then.
playing
hasn't
Hermione Granger.
Yeah.
Look alike. She had people coming up to her and say, "Excuse me, are you Hermione Granger?" And she said, "Do I look like Hermione Granger? I'm half Japanese."
she? So your kids had a bit of struggle.
Yeah, a bit of struggle, but they weren't kind of beaten up in the
Yeah.
playground or anything like that. It wasn't a kind of violent bullying. It was more
Yeah.
kind of name calling and the usual kind of. But that's everybody. Bullying is
Yeah.
endemic.
You're never
to
going to get
Japan.
shut of it, are you?
No.
See, the other reason I'm asking about your kids is they've had that struggle. When you went from England to Australia, did you get shit for being a Brit?
I had shit for my Pommy accent, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what you'd have been 5?
Yeah, 5 or 6. Maybe when I was 5 or 6, maybe not so bad because kids are pretty innocent at that age. But by the time I got to 7 or 8, I'd started to lose my accent by
Yeah.
then. But I was still identified as a Pommy.
And there were no other kids, no other. I don't want to say immigrants. No other kids that have emigrated in your class.
There were a few, but I lived in a kind of outer suburban area, which was mostly kids that were born here, or born
Right.
in Australia.
In Sydney.
In Sydney.
What were the
yeah.
neighbourhood?
It was the area was kind of Borkham Hills, Castle Hill. It's northwestern Sydney, the outer suburban,
So past Northern Beaches,
inland from Northern Beaches.
inland from Northern Beaches,
yeah,
right?
and
okay.
very suburban, kind of on the edge of forested land and farmland.
So you're not by the beach if you're up northwest, are you?
No, but where I first lived, Balgala, that's just up the hill from Manly, which is
Yeah.
Northside Beach.
What did you move from there for?
My mother had a job with a real estate agent
Right.
in that town,
Yeah.
and we just lived in a flat in Balgala. We were able to move to a house in.
Right.
It was a better place to live, better environment, and we still drove to the beach on weekends.
Yeah.
So. And I could ride a bike down to the local bush and go for a walk in the forest.
So you're an only child?
Yeah.
See, it's the same with me.
Yeah.
I found it fucking incredibly boring.
Yeah, well,
Incredibly boring.
I always had friends that I could hang out with, and I used to go and stay with my friends, or they'd come and stay at my place. And I always wanted to have a younger sister. Actually, I always wanted a younger sister so I could meet all the friends. Once I got to kind of 13, 14, I said, "God, I wish I had a younger sister. It'd be so much easier to meet girls." As my junior high school was boys only.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was a fucking disaster.
There's something wrong with that.
It was a disaster. It was an agricultural high school, and it was a selective school. It was a very high-level academic school, but not a private school.
Yeah.
It was what you'd call a high-level state school. But it was boys only. And after I left, about within 5 years or so, they'd gone co-ed.
Yeah.
They brought girls in, but
see, that school I used to work at Zushi, the kids don't seem to develop in like teenage kids. You've got 18-year-old boys that are starved of female attention.
Yeah.
They don't really employ that many female teachers.
Right.
And the kids are fucking running into walls because they just want to fuck.
Yeah.
And there's no...
Or at least have girls to fantasize about it close. And I mean, we used to chat up the girls on the bus going home, from the local Catholic school.
Yeah.
But there were girls in my local area. I had contact with girls in my local area. But my junior high school was cadets, rugby union, and short hair only. And this was in the era of the Beatles. And it drove me crazy. Yeah. After 4 years, I transferred to the local high school, to Castle Hill High School, and it was like, this is the real world. Yeah. Girls, I can grow my hair long. And cool. There's no cadet corps.
Yeah.
I can hang out with my friends and smoke weed in the parking lot.
It's all colour.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all colour.
Exactly.
You see,
and that was fantastic. I
think being in Australia, because you've got the good weather, you could be outside all the time. Yeah. We're always pissing it down where I was.
Right.
And my mum wouldn't let other kids in our house. Yeah. So, I've got this, those books that kids read about famous people here. There's one about the Beatles.
Right.
Right. And there's a fucking drawing in there of Ringo Starr just looking out the window over what is Liverpool. Because he were an only child, wasn't he?
The Dingle. This was in a very, I would say, down market area of Liverpool.
But he's just looking out onto that. It's a cartoon drawing.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's my fucking childhood. That's all I were doing. Looking out my bedroom window, it raining.
Right.
And my mum and dad would be, Sunday, it always felt like Sunday. Mum and dad would be downstairs watching telly. What we doing? Oh, it's raining. And there was fuck all to do.
Yeah, we had a backyard with space. I used to kick a soccer ball against the fence. I had friends in the local area. The bush was just down the hill.
Yeah.
Very outdoorsy. I used to go walking in the forest all the time, and
so you couldn't fucking do it. And plus, obviously, it was the height of the Yorkshire Ripper.
Oh God!
So you weren't going out at night.
Absolutely.
But my parents were very unadventurous.
Yeah.
So what I want to talk to you about today is that how did you get from London to Sydney?
Right.
Because it was £10 pom?
We weren't £10 poms, but it was a boat full of £10 poms. But some of the people up in cabin class and a few of the people in tourist class, we paid our own way. And the reason for that was it was a newly united couple. They just got together.
Yeah.
So they didn't know if it was just, the throes of romance or whether it was a long-term relationship. And they just weren't sure if they were going to like Australia. They wanted to have the freedom to say, oh, yeah, well, we've had a look around, we don't like it, and we're going back home. So they weren't sure. It wasn't like, okay, we are definitely emigrating to Australia for life, or for at least the minimum 2 years, which was the requirement for a £10 passage.
So how much did they pay?
A couple of £100.
In 1960...
59.
50. So that's a lot of fucking money.
Yeah, it was. Isn't it? Yeah, my mum had a bit of savings. Her grandparents were reasonably well off, and I think she put some of the money she got from them aside. So
but they wouldn't have stuck it out for 2 years just for £10 then, no?
I don't know. For whatever reasons, I think it might have been partly. It was just the honeymoon period. They didn't know if they were going to stay together. And I think they'd both had a few relationships. They both had failed marriages.
Yeah.
which makes you very wary if
Yeah.
you've been divorced. I think. Having been divorced twice, it does make you wary.
Well, touch wood, I've not been divorced.
Well, good for you.
But your mum and stepdad must have got up one day and put their feet on the bedroom floor and gone, right, we've got to fucking leave here.
Yeah, well, they weren't even in the same bedroom. They basically, my stepfather was still with his soon-to-be ex-wife, and my mother was still with my dad.
And neither of them had divorced your dad or his wife?
Neither divorced. My mum basically said to my dad, I'm going down to see my sister for a long weekend down in Folkestone, which is where they lived at the time, and she never came back. And I think on that weekend they jumped on board the RMS Orion and off they sailed down the Thames and into the Channel, and off we go.
But I used to hear those stories in the 70s. I said, right. Oh yeah, I told her I was going to Bucky's to put a bet on an horse, and I came back 3 months later. Right. I used to hear those stories all the time, but that's the first time I've met somebody who your mother just went.
Yeah, well, she eventually went back to England. God, it must have been in the 80s, maybe. It was like, she didn't go back for 20, 30 years.
And did she didn't meet your dad, did she? Did she go back and see him? She
didn't meet my dad, but she met kind of mutual friends that knew both of them in their younger days when they were married. There was divorce papers were exchanged, I think, in the 70s. I'm not
wow.
exactly sure, but eventually there was contact made, and to kind of liberate both of them for future marriage or whatever. They came to a legal arrangement and they formally divorced.
Let me think. How did she meet your stepdad then?
I don't know. I think actually they had a mutual friend whose name was Moyna, and I think Moyna was having an affair with this guy. And
so you were a player then, yeah?
He was a player for sure. He's a retired sportsman. He's got all the street cred.
But you'd think everybody was so straight laced back in
the 50s. No, I mean people
were all
still
jumping all over each other.
People still fucked around, right through. Even in the Victorian era, there were all kinds of things.
But divorce was just taboo back then, wasn't it?
It was, and at least you didn't talk about it, even if it happened. But basically, she met this guy through their friend Moyna, and I think his initial reaction wasn't particularly good. I mean, Moyna did say to me years later, she said, when Charlie first met your mother, he said, I don't particularly like her.
And he spent how many years with her?
Until he died when I was 14, so 9 years. He was quite old. He was in his late 50s, early 60s, I think.
When he died?
When he died. Yeah.
What did he die of?
I think he was in his late 50s, early 60s when he met my mother. No, maybe he was in his 50s. He died at 65, heart attack. Just boom, like that. Yeah.
In house?
Yep.
Did you find him?
Wasn't there. Wow. I'd gone up to the Central Coast, north of Sydney, camping with my friends, and he popped off while I was
So you came home to that, because there'd been no phones back then, wouldn't there?
My mum actually came up and told me what had happened, and she said, "Look, you don't have to come back." And I said, "No, of course I'm coming back.
Yeah.
We've got things to sort out." So I left my friends and went back.
Did he leave you in the shit, or were you quite comfortable? You weren't going to get kicked out or out, were you?
We didn't actually own our own house in Australia. We always rented.
Right.
Right through my childhood, it was always a rental. So we used to change houses every few years.
Yeah.
When there was a reason to change, like the owners were going to occupy again, or we decided we couldn't afford the rent on that place, or whatever the reason. So after my stepfather died, we were in probably the nicest house I ever lived. Just big old stone house, and big gardens. Had a vegetable garden and a tree that I could sit in. So we had to leave that place. We moved to somewhere a bit smaller because there was only two of us by then.
It's a bit rough as a start, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's two dads be 14.
Right.
Fuck. So when you jumped on that boat in London,
Yeah.
did you know what the fuck was going on at 5?
Yeah, I knew.
Did you know where Australia was?
I had a vague idea. It was halfway around the world.
Yeah.
That was always the phrase that we used. We're going halfway around the world. We're going to go to Australia. We might even stop and live there. But
Yeah.
we're going on a long sea voyage, and we're going to get on the Orion, the
Yeah.
name of the ship, and we're going to travel halfway around the world. And there was no kind of, we're going to live in Australia forever.
Yeah.
And you're never going to see your father again or anything like that. It wasn't clearly.
So you thought you were coming back?
I didn't really know, and I didn't kind of ask the question. I just knew I had a new father, Charlie, and we were going on this long sea voyage, and it was very exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
That's about as far as you go when
But
you're
thoughts of your other dad,
I wasn't that close to my other
No,
dad, actually. I
no.
didn't see him that much, and there was the incident with
Yeah,
him
yeah.
hiding behind a
So you'd
tree
be
and
glad to get out,
scaring me.
wouldn't you? You'd be glad to be away.
Yeah, I don't remember him very clearly.
Yeah.
I have more of a pre-trip. I have more of a memory of Charlie.
Yeah.
Because he probably appeared on the scene maybe when I was 4.5. And my dad was kind of there sometimes, and maybe he was there more in my first 0 to 3, which I don't remember very, very much of at all.
Did he have kids?
My
Charlie?
dad. Charlie? No.
No kids?
No kids.
All right, so it's not as if he's abandoned his kids then, is it?
No, he just abandoned his wife.
The shit that used to go on, when you're a kid,
Yeah.
you think, oh, that doesn't happen in this family. But
Yeah, well, on TV it was all happy families. It
Yeah.
was all Father Knows Best, and
Yeah.
My Three Sons, and the Donna Reed Show, and all this kind of American sitcom
Yeah.
stuff where there's always 2 kids, maybe there were 3 sons in one of the shows. Usually there's a brother and a sister and a happily married
Yeah.
husband and wife and a dog.
Nobody's fucking about with other people, have they?
No, not on TV.
Not on TV.
Absolutely not. So, but that was a manufactured image to kind of bolster this very conservative. God, we survived the war,
Yeah,
and now all we want is security.
yeah,
And the best way to have security is a nuclear family and a
Yeah.
nice house in suburbia, and don't fuck it up
yeah.
by getting divorced or having love affairs or whatever it is. Live straight and be happy.
But don't you find now, how old are you now?
68.
68. Don't you find now at 68, I know at 51, those people that did that are fucking miserable.
Yeah.
Still in the same place.
People who stayed married in an unhappy marriage,
Yeah.
I think they might have even been in the majority. I'm not sure
Yeah.
about that. That's maybe a very cynical view. But, a lot of people, the prevailing philosophy was we have to stay together for the kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, for a kid to be in an unhappy marriage, and my mother's marriage to my stepfather, in the last 2 or 3 years was an unhappy marriage. There
Yeah.
were lots of loud arguments and slamming of doors, and
Yeah.
I think she was planning to leave him anyway.
Yeah,
So, and I remember thinking, well, if you're going to bitch at each other every day, why stay together?
bother? Yeah.
And when she said to me, she said, I've decided to leave your stepfather. I thought, yeah, it's probably a good idea.
So how many years were that before he died?
It was just before he died. It was within a year.
So there weren't many tears then when he just...
No, well, they were different generations anyway.
Yeah,
He was
yeah, yeah.
23 years older than
Right.
she was. So I think by that time she'd realised that she had this man in his mid-60s
Yeah,
on her hands, and she's still in her early 40s, and she's probably thinking, well, probably time for another love affair, isn't it?
well, the fucking gap gets bigger as you get older, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It seems to.
Well, if you go backwards, I mean, if you're 23 and your partner's 46,
Yeah.
that's a big gap too.
Yeah, but when they start aging and you've got to look after...
Yeah, when you're still in your middle age and
Yeah,
they're drawing a pension, that's a big difference too. I think basically 23 years is too much.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I've had a couple of girlfriends 23 years younger than me, but I can see from their perspective
Yeah.
it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, fuck that. But you see, getting on, my parents would have never have done that. My dad, before I came on the scene, my dad got these 2 10-pound ticket
£10 pom tickets.
£10 pom tickets
So
to
why
go.
why didn't they take them?
So they're ready to go. It's the week before. My mum turns to my dad and said, "I'm not leaving my mother."
Ah, of course.
So they didn't fucking go.
We couldn't just buy one more ticket and take Mum?
No, because she were married. Obviously, she married to my granddad, but he used to kick the fuck out of her constantly. Come home from working men's club and knock her about. When my mother were having an episode, I'd be farmed out to my nan, because me and my nan were like that.
Right.
Peas in a pod.
Right.
The only real one who were nice. Well, my dad were fine. My dad. But everybody else in the family fucking hated me. But my nan, that was just pure love that she was showing me.
Right.
So I would get sent there on a weekend when my mum were having an episode. I'd get up on a Sunday morning early, go downstairs, and my nan would be asleep on the couch with fucking bruises all over her. Because my granddad had come back from Working Men's Club pissed up and kicked her about. And the first thing she'd say to me, remember, she'd look up from the couch surprised that I'd woke up before, and she'd just say to me, don't tell your mum, and then she'd cover her bruises up. And she fucking stayed married to him. But that's like you say, that's what you did, didn't you?
Yeah.
But I remember.
And, you know, this is pre-women's liberation. It's pre-kind of, you know, single women's shelters. There wasn't the support. There wasn't the community support that there is now.
I remember
women in that situation now can say, okay, I can leave this situation. I can report this guy. I can go and stay in a women's shelter. I can find someone to help me.
I remember being at the kitchen table, tiny kid, 4 or 5 years old, listening to me nan talking to my mum about, I'm going to crush some glass up and put it in his food. Fucking kill him, I'm sick of it. I was thinking, what? And you'll get away with that? But yeah, they would talk about fucking doing him in because he was just a violent fucking drunk. Yeah. But she stuck with it, like you said, for kids.
People like that shouldn't drink.
But nobody in my family, until me, has just gone, fuck this shit, and left.
Right.
They've stayed in it.
Right.
Like, oof.
Yeah, I've heard numerous stories about unhappy marriages which were endured.
But not just unhappy
children.
marriage, the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it'd take the edge off a bit if you were in Sydney.
Yeah.
But where I'm from, there's fucking no going on there
That's
at all.
Bradford, yeah?
Yeah, and it's just grey and fucking rainy. The fucking salary shite, the shit jobs.
I remember London winter. I went back to London in the mid-'80s, and I had one winter in London, and I remember coming out of I was teaching in an international school. I came out of school one day, it was about 3 PM, it was almost dark, and I thought, bloody hell, this is a really short day.
Yeah.
And every day it'd be grey and drizzle in the morning, and I remember thinking, I just don't like this place. I don't like the atmosphere. So 1 year later, it was coming up to winter, and I was thinking, I'm not going to go through this again. So I got a job with the British Council in Napoli, southern Italy, which was lovely.
Just in winter?
I planned to stay longer, but I was down there for about 6 months, and I got news that my dad was really sick. He had leukemia. So I came back to see him, and good thing I did, because he died within 2 or 3 months. So, yeah, and that was after being reunited with him, kind of after a 28-year gap.
Yeah.
And I managed to spend, a year or two, minus the 6 months in Italy. So we reconnected, and then it was good timing because he died, within a couple of years of our reunion.
And like he didn't know where you'd fucking gone.
He didn't know. Yeah, I think.
So, I mean, you could have been in a car accident. Somebody could have kidnapped you and fucking human trafficked you.
There was a missing persons complaint.
So he
filed.
must have been pacing up and down.
Yeah. But eventually...
Did her sister know what she was doing? Where she said she'd gone to?
I'm not sure. I think... I'm really not sure. But eventually my stepfather's wife contacted my father.
Right, okay.
And it must have been through Moina, through the friend, his ex-lover, who was also my mother's best friend.
Yeah.
I think eventually he received a letter from my stepfather's wife,
Right.
basically saying, I think our respective spouses may have run away together. I've received some information,
Yeah.
and that's when the penny dropped, and he knew what had happened.
But still, to be that long without knowing what had happened to you.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, if I'm pissed off with my wife and she goes missing with kids, I'm going to be worrying about the kids, not so much her.
sure.
And back then, there's no internet, there's no phones. Like, fucking
Well, what
Jesus.
my dad said was, he said, I wasn't so much worried about you because I knew your mother would give you the highest priority. I knew your mother really loved you, and she wouldn't do anything to hurt you. So I was more worried about where she'd gone and what had happened to her. But I knew that you'd be properly looked after.
You'd be right.
Yeah,
Different times, wouldn't it? Different times.
sure.
So when you sailed out of the Thames, that was the first time you'd left the UK?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I was 5, and basically I'd spent my first 5 years living in Clapham Common, going to the local kindergarten probably for the last year or two.
Yeah.
Living at home with my parents and having a little bit of contact with the neighbours and local kids and stuff
But
like
that
that.
was just your world, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So when you went out of the Thames, did you know what were going on?
I knew we were on a long journey. I knew we were going to Australia,
How long did it take?
but I didn't. It was about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, okay.
I didn't know. I wasn't kind of a master of world geography, so I didn't know exactly. I knew we were going to go through the Suez Canal. That was one.
So you knew what the Suez Canal was?
I knew about the Suez Canal,
Right.
and I knew we were going to stop in. I'd heard we're going to stop. We're going to Naples first.
Yeah,
Napoli.
yeah.
And I knew we were going through the Suez Canal,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew we were going to go to Australia. I didn't know exactly how many different places in Australia.
Yeah.
And I knew we were going to Ceylon,
Right.
which sounded, really kind of tropical and exotic and all that sort of thing. But I didn't know a lot of the finer details, and I didn't have this kind of image of the Channel and the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, etc., etc. I just knew a few of the coming destinations.
Right, okay.
That's the only real picture I had.
Were it grey and rainy when you set off?
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
What month were it?
It was February.
Fucking guaranteed that, isn't it?
definitely-
February.
Definitely grey and rainy. Yeah, it was typical London weather.
Yeah.
And so, when you're sailing out of weather like that and you're going south
Yeah.
to warmer climes,
bad.
you can only think, it's got to get better than
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
At the same time, I think at first it was all about the ship.
Yeah.
It was like, you walk up the gangplank and you're on this floating city, and there's hundreds of people and there's cabins everywhere and there's decks and there's views, and it's just really exciting to get on a big ship when you're a 5-year-old boy is a wild adventure.
Were there a lot of kids on the ship?
Yeah,
All ages?
yeah.
Were there school on the ship?
I
Were there any teaching going on?
don't recall there was school going on. I've actually read an account of a girl who travelled at the age of about 12 or 13. She
Yeah.
said we didn't have to go to school
Right, okay.
for 5 weeks. So I assumed there was no school. There may have been kind of kids' activities,
Yeah.
like a pool day or a deck games day or an indoor games day or
Yeah.
whatever it is. There are lots of social activities on the boat, and I imagine some of those were specifically for kids.
Were there any old people that were emigrating for the first time? Can you remember?
They were all generations.
So it wasn't just young couples and
No,
stuff like that?
there were families that were older. I think basically it was younger couples looking for a new life, families with children,
Yeah.
people who thought they were going to have a better life in Australia. Maybe, for the £10 poms especially, probably working people that just got sick of the grind. But also in the upper cabins, maybe more middle class families who wanted a change of environment. Maybe felt that London was not a healthy place to live.
So it couldn't have just been London people. This boat couldn't have just been filled with people from
Oh,
London.
hell
though,
no,
were
no.
it?
There were probably Liverpudlians
All over the
and
place.
Irish people,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
maybe there are other boats that sailed from Ireland,
Mm.
but there were certainly people from all over England
Mm.
that came. London was the big city, so maybe more people from London than
Yeah.
anywhere else, and that's the departure point. So it's easy to get to. But there must have been Liverpudlians and
Yeah.
Mancunians and
I mean, you would have never heard those accents before,
No.
would you?
no,
Living
and
in
I
London.
I maybe couldn't even differentiate between the different accents.
Yeah.
As long as they spoke English, I could basically understand them.
I remember being in elementary school, in first school in England, and it must have been 79, 80.
Right.
And Martin Ferrier was his name,
Uh-huh.
and his mum and dad just thought, fuck this shit, we're going to Australia.
Right.
And they went to Sydney, and they were never seen again. They just fucking... And I remember going home and saying to my mum and dad, my friend's going to Australia. His mum and dad have said, right, that's it for Bradford, we're going to move to Australia. And I said, why can't we do it? Oh, there's big spiders there, we're not going there. And that end of conversation.
Well,
End of conversation.
Well, there are big spiders
Yeah.
there, and there are big snakes,
Yeah.
and there are big sharks, and there are poisonous jellyfish and poisonous octopus, and I mean it's Australia's infamous for venomous wildlife, but it's wide open spaces.
Yeah.
It's a population of at the time we arrived less than 20 million
Yeah,
in a country bigger than the whole of Europe,
yeah.
and
There's room for everybody.
yeah, and there's everything from pure tropics
Yeah.
up in the north, where you've got wet and dry season, no winter,
Yeah.
down to what I call very rainy English climate down in Tasmania. You have a choice of climatic zones. You have a choice of city or country, coastal or inland. But the overriding thing about Australia is space. Like almost everybody has. Not so much now in the cities. There's a lot more high-rise now. But in those days, most people had a house with a small front garden and a big backyard.
Yeah.
And a big blue sky. It's the driest continent.
Yeah.
So the sun shines a lot. Maybe too much for some people. A lot of skin cancer in Australia.
But
People get too much sun.
because I came from somewhere that's so grey, I was saying to my mum and dad, why do we live here? As a small kid,
Good question.
why do we live here?
Right,
Fucking raining all the time. Why are we living here?
right,
And they had no answer for me.
right. Is that
Yeah.
where they were born?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think my dad's granddad came over from Ireland,
Right,
and he landed in Bradford, and then my granddad and my dad, 2 generations stayed there
right.
until me, and it
Right.
was fucking see you.
Well, my mum was born in Highgate. She was from
Yeah.
the north side, and a little bit upper crust, her family.
Yeah.
And my dad was born in Fulham,
Yeah,
and the family seat, the Haskell family, originally came from down in Dorset.
right.
Country people, basically.
So
I had an uncle who was a gamekeeper. He was, he had ferrets for rabbit hunting and stuff like that, and they lived in a 300-year-old thatched cottage in a Dorset village. That's where the family came
Sounds
from.
idyllic.
Yeah.
So how many generations stayed in London before your mum decided to?
I think basically both families go back several generations in London. My dad's family, I think, at some stage moved up from Dorset into London, maybe for university or whatever the reason was, or for work. A lot of people come to London just because it's easier to get a job in the big city.
But that boat trip,
Yeah.
going to those places which were so different. I mean, Naples, Suez Canal, Ceylon,
Right.
and then Australia. It's so fucking different.
Yeah,
At 5-year-old,
absolutely.
that must have planted a seed.
Yeah, because then you suddenly realise that, hey, not everybody speaks English, and not everybody looks the same,
Yeah,
and not everybody goes to church on Sunday, and not everybody plays soccer and cricket,
yeah,
and all those other things. And from the moment we the first port of call was Naples,
yeah,
And I realised as soon as I got off the boat that I can't understand anybody.
Yeah.
They're all speaking Italian, or in fact Neapolitan, a lot of them, because they speak a dialect in Naples. And but one thing was constant. We went to Pompeii, the old Roman city that got flattened by Vesuvius. It was grey and drizzling.
Just like England.
It's just like English weather.
This fucking weather doesn't change wherever you
And
go.
we're walking around these ruins. I remember this really clearly. I remember this firsthand. This is not a Super 8 home movie memory. Yeah. This is a first-hand memory. I looked up at my mum and said, "It's a lousy day." And the guide heard me say it, and he thought, the guide was bilingual. He spoke, Italian and English. He thought I'd said, "He's a lousy guide." And he said to Mum, "What do you mean I'm a lousy guide?" And she said, No. He said, "It's a lousy day." He's talking about the weather. And I guess with my, in my London accent, day become die, and die sounds like guide. So, I realised even if I was speaking English to someone who spoke English, they may not understand me anyway. Mm. So, I think language is one of the first things you realise. Apart from the fact that, you've got this different landscape and the buildings look different and the cars are different. Everyone's driving, Cinquecento, the little Fiats, and, everything changes.
You see, what you've just said there, I mean, you've realised that people didn't speak another language when you went to Naples for the first time.
Yeah.
I realised that in Bradford. I've come to the same conclusions that you came to, but I was in Bradford around the same age. I can, as clear as day, remember being in some kind of supermarket or hardware store and there being a Pakistani couple in full Pakistani dress.
Wow.
The robes that they wear in Karachi or wherever.
Yeah.
Big beard, and the woman's got a face mask, a covering on.
Oh, wow.
And
a veil.
They're cracking onto each other in... What would it be?
Urdu,
yeah. And looking at them, thinking, and I remember thinking, well, they're speaking to each other like that, but they must say it. It goes in the brain, they translate it into English, and then it comes back out. And I remember thinking that, looking at them as they were speaking,
right,
and
thinking that they're processing those two languages really fast.
And then the fella just looked at me and smiled.
Yeah.
And off they went. And I remember thinking that, and driving home, there were all these big old Victorian buildings that the Indians had turned into Indian cinemas.
Right.
And they had those fucking huge colourful posters up.
Right.
And the Hindi titles. I think, oh, well, that's not even English as well. So I were coming to the same conclusion as you were. Right. Without fucking going anywhere. Because there were so many Asians.
This was like 1970s?
Early 70s, yeah.
Yeah, see, I left London in the late 50s, and I don't know how much immigration there was from South Asia at that time, but it was much less than by the 70s. There were a lot more Caribbean people, there were a lot more African people, there were a lot more South Asian people in England.
Yeah.
And I think when I left London, I don't have any recollection of a foreign face or a foreign language.
Bradford was a magnet for Pakistanis and Indians.
I realised it was a South Asian
magnet, and
hub.
then
why?
Cheap.
Okay.
Well, we had all the textile mills.
Work.
We had the textile mills, bus driving, bus conductors, and white people didn't want to do those jobs.
Yeah, and also textiles is a very South Asian thing.
Yeah,
I mean, even now, textile manufacturing is huge in South Asia.
But all those jobs went...
It's traditional. It goes back hundreds of years, textiles.
But all those jobs went back to India because it was cheaper.
Right.
And Pakistan.
Exactly.
So there were no jobs. And then the white people in Bradford said, well, there's no jobs, fuck off back, for want of a better word. And they said no, and then it was just fucking racism.
Yeah.
Even as just on walls of houses in Asian neighbourhoods, fucking wogs out, fuck off home. I remember reading that as a child and saying to my mum, what does fuck off mean?
Right.
Wogs out, what does that mean? And my mum would tell me exactly what it meant, because that's how people spoke then.
I remember racism in Australia when I arrived. maybe when I was 5. But as I went through primary school, there was a lot of, the use of wogs or dagos or whatever it was. There was racism directed towards, firstly, Aborigines, bungs, who were, they were just on the fringes of society, basically.
Yeah.
But there was always racism directed to the most recently arrived groups. So the Italians used to get a hard time in the 60s, and then the Maltese used to get a hard time.
The Maltese?
A lot of people came from Malta, because Malta is an English-speaking island. And we had a lot of Maltese people.
There can't be that many Maltese people in the world, can
in
there?
the area I live, there are a lot of Maltese people.
Really?
And, I remember one guy in particular, he was giving us a lift to high school, and there was an accident. He went out to check out what had happened. I think it was a bus and a car. And he went out to check to see if one of his friends was driving the bus. And he came back into the car. No, he said, no, it's just one of those Maltese cunts. I thought, maybe the Maltese are not quite so popular. But, Italians and Greeks, especially, huge Italian and Greek populations in Australia, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne. And so they were the Wogs, or the Italians were the Dagos. And basically there was this progressive waves of racism directed towards the most recent set of arrivals, and eventually became the Chinks, the Vietnamese, after the war, when we had a lot of Vietnamese immigration.
When I was living in Sydney in 2002, the Lebanese were getting it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're the most recent ones, but they were getting it because there were those rape gangs that had just been caught in Sydney.
Ah, okay.
I think that they were picking women up at Bondi Beach.
It was related to the beaches, because they thought women who walked around in bikinis were obviously offering their bodies for any man who happened to be passing by. Yeah.
But a woman got on whatever news channel it was, maybe 9 o'clock. It couldn't have been 6 o'clock because kids would have still been up.
Right.
But she was saying that they got her in a car park and 30 of them went through her. And then she went to police. The police went to the car park and just picked up all the used condoms and got them from that. Yeah.
DNA.
This 17-year-old kid who was the ringleader, 17-year-old, were holding a gun to her head as she was getting raped. And the judge sent him down for 40 years. So he's only halfway through his sentence now. Yeah.
It's one way to terminate your life very
fucking
early.
Years at 17, though. Jesus. And he said that's when you'll be ready for parole. You're not going anywhere for 40 years.
Yeah, we'll give you some time to think about what you did.
But then they interviewed the kid's family, the Lebanese family, the day after. And the sister was saying, well, some of these women like that sort of thing. Like, what? But yeah, the Lebanese were definitely getting it.
Right.
But then again, the Aborigines were always getting it, saying...
the Aborigines were living in corrugated iron huts on the edge of towns. This is in the countryside, especially. But even in Sydney, they were living in the lowest status inner city areas.
But what were you getting taught about them? Just look and leave them alone and...
Basically, when I was in school in Australia, in primary school, we learnt about the British history of Australia. Like Australian history began when Captain Cook landed in Botany Bay in 1770, and there were Aborigines there, but we didn't bother to actually teach about Aboriginal culture. A little bit about boomerangs and spears, and not what happened to the Aborigines when Captain Cook landed and years thereafter, but the kind of romantic traditional image of the noble savage was the kind of Aboriginal culture that we learned about. And the rest was all 1770 Captain Cook, 1788 the First Fleet, Arthur Phillip, dates and events. And the founding of Sydney,
from the white
Melbourne.
Man's point of view.
Exactly, it was the British history of Australia, very much so.
And it's the same with growing up in England. You never learnt about the uprising in Ireland.
Right.
You just heard about what they were doing to us.
Right.
And then when in 2016, I took my dad round the south of Ireland. We went everywhere. and there'd be monuments up for when the IRA attacked a British convoy,
Right.
and these Irish people died, and I would be thinking, well, that's wrong, isn't it? But it's not wrong. They weren't terrorists. They were
Not
just
for them. It's a war of liberation. It's a war of independence.
But even going around the Republic of Ireland and seeing the Irish flag, with Thatcher putting all that shit into me when I were a kid,
right.
I was looking at that flag the same way as you see the Taliban flag now, because that was, I mean, Jerry Adams was on mute on the news in England when he would speak.
Right.
Fucking childish.
Yeah. Well, that's the way history is distorted. Yeah. It's the
you just hear it from their point
the
of view.
history of the conqueror, or the history according to whose side you're on.
Yeah.
Basically.
My wife Shima had no idea about the railway in Burma.
Oh, really?
What the Japanese did to the British, and
wow,
she had fucking no idea.
What about and there's this recurring thing of the Nanking massacre in China, and the way it's alluded to in the history books or completely edited out of the history books, and it changes over time. History is manipulated, and it's very hard for a powerful country to admit their guilt.
Yeah.
Americans will still say, we had to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. It saved hundreds of thousands of lives. It ended the war early. It saved, American lives and Japanese lives. And we basically saved lives by bombing Hiroshima.
Yeah.
And, that's basically justifying one of the most outrageous deeds of any war. So, history can be edited and distorted by whoever happens to control the media, or whoever edits the textbooks.
I mean, I can't believe that we're still... I mean, tomorrow's 9/11, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's still fucking, but what have you been doing for the last 50 years for that to happen? They don't get it, do they?
Did you ever see in Bowling for Columbine, the Michael Moore movie?
Yeah.
There's a series of historical photos, a little bit of video maybe, but it goes from various things the Americans have done in Central America and South America. XYZ assassinated, and the coup against Allende in Chile, and Nicaragua, and the Shah being installed in Iran, and it ends with the bombing of the World Trade Center, the planes flying into the World Trade Center, and it doesn't make a comment, but the whole thing, it is a comment, as basically saying that all these things that the CIA or the American government have done over the previous 20 or 30 years has led to this attack.
And 9/11 was just a nibble, wasn't it, compared to what the Americans have done?
America fights most of its wars outside America. Yeah. It's very rare for anything like that to happen inside America, and if it does, it's usually a right-wing militia or some kind of a crazy, a minority movement, or a lone wolf. But basically, I think very few people understand those things because the media doesn't allow that kind of thing to be discussed.
Was there anything going on in Australia with terrorism and stuff when you were a kid? Because the IRA were trying to flatten the north of England when I were growing up.
No, we didn't have any terrorism. There are a couple of minor incidents, but there was a lot of anti-American sentiment when I was probably in my late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
And particularly we were unhappy about the US bases in Australia, which were probably nuclear targets. And, we're still in the era of the Cold War, basically.
Because the Australians sent soldiers to Vietnam, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, because we believed in the domino theory. We thought, okay, communism started in Russia, and then it hit China, and then it's coming down through Korea,
Vietnam's just there,
and Vietnam's just here, and then it's going to be, and there was the Communist Party was quite active in Indonesia at that time, which is the next neighbour to the north, And we've got this wave of red coming down the map. All these countries falling to the communists. Falling was the operative word. And so Vietnam goes, and we fought in Korea as well for the same reason. We fought in Vietnam to prevent the communists taking over the country, which they did anyway. And I'm sure Australia was active in anti-communist movement inside Indonesia as well.
Is that why Australia were anti-Asian at that time?
I think it goes back further than that. There was a wave of Chinese immigration to Australia during the gold rushes, and this is in the late 19th century. And the Chinese at this time, you had guys with long plaited ponytails, and where they looked like they were aliens basically. They just looked so different, and they all spoke Chinese, and they were like people from another planet almost. And although at that time Australia was fairly open, a lot of Chinese came in for the gold rushes, and they stayed. And a lot of them set up small businesses. Eventually, they became traders and restaurant owners, etc. And they became Australian Chinese. And now, if you go into a country town in Australia, and you go into a Chinese restaurant, you won't really get Chinese food. You'll get chow mein, chop suey, a very Australianized, low-spice version of Chinese food. If you want real Chinese food in Australia, you go into Chinatown, where you can get proper yum cha, dim sum, and Peking duck, and the whole range of different cuisines from different regions of China. But there's a kind of a homogenized, Australianized, traditional Chinese
it's not even
cuisine.
Fusion, is it? It's just for the Australian palate.
Yeah, it's like spag bol in England, or an English curry. Well, it's related to the original source, but it's been totally anglicised, and the same with Australian Chinese.
If you go into India or Pakistan, they're not going to be in chicken tikka masala like we eat it in Bradford. Although it is a fantastic dish for the English. It's the most popular dish in the UK.
Right.
And in Bradford, you've got the fucking creme de la creme restaurants, Indian restaurants.
Right.
Fucking amazing. But you're not eating that in India.
Right.
But it is,
Yeah, so there was a reaction to the Chinese, and I think the White Australia policy, it was instituted in the early 20th century, and I think it was partly a reaction to the wave of Chinese immigration that came in. It wasn't an anti-communist thing at that time, because the revolution didn't come till 49. But later, when the Cold War broke out, the White Australia policy was already in place. There was very little Asian immigration in the first half of the 20th century, and Pacific Islanders also were kept out.
So where you
dark skin was not in favour, basically.
And the country's populated originally by dark-skinned people.
Exactly, but we were building a white European society and mostly an Anglo-Saxon society until World War II.
So in your neighbourhood, where were most of the foreigners from?
Where I grew up in Australia? Italy. Yeah, we had an Italian family called the Bombardieris, and were
their parents speaking with an Italian accent?
Yeah.
Really?
They were market gardeners. They had a sizable piece of land just on the edge of the suburb, and they ran the local fruit and vegetable shop. And they were very popular with with the regular citizens of the local area. And I think in a lot of places, a lot of the Italians immigrated from southern Italy, which was much poorer. There was much more reason to leave. I don't think so many people came out of Milano, but a lot of people came out of Napoli and Sicily and the south.
It's a bit of a switch compared to the UK. And all the money's in the south in the UK, but all the money's in the north in Italy.
Yeah, exactly.
And Spain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the foreigners in my local suburb in Australia were mostly Italian, and later, maybe some Maltese and maybe a few Greeks, but it's a white middle class suburb.
So a
lot of the foreigners are in the city, in the centre. There are suburbs in the centre of Sydney that are almost majority Italian. Leichhardt is one in particular, which became the Italian suburb with the best Italian restaurants. And then there's Chinatown in the centre, which is very much Chinese people living right in the centre of the city, 2 kilometres from the central GPO.
So when you, in Australia, calling someone, you call an Italian a wog, yeah?
Right.
And is that, would they go to blows if somebody said that, or is it just like calling me a pom?
No, it's a bit darker than that.
Because
we also use the phrase eye ties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because our friend Gav, who went to London, he started using that word in London, and now in London it's a completely different, or in the UK that word is it's like saying the N word in America.
Right.
And this black fella said, you're going to have to stop using that word.
Yeah.
And it would explain to her, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Because when I first went to Australia and heard that, I was like, you can say that here?
Right.
But it's for Italians.
Yeah, I mean Sydney grew up as a convict settlement.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's been a rough town. It's been known as a rough town right from the beginnings of its European history. And I think it's still got a little bit of a wild town reputation, even though now it's totally internationalized and it's probably one of the great cities of the world in a lot of ways. It's certainly got one of the great landscapes of the world.
I fucking loved it when I lived there.
Yeah.
I loved it. And I think you could see, when I was there 20 years ago, you could see 10, 15, 20 years before.
Right.
It would have been a lot more fun because it would have been a lot rougher. I think they were taking the edges off of the cross and stuff, because I just lived 2 minutes from King's Cross.
Right.
But it were just a lot of fun when I was there.
The other thing that happened, I think it happened from maybe the 60s or early 70s, the whole idea of multicultural became very fashionable. So we started to celebrate the fact that we had this huge Italian community, Greek community, Turkish community, later Lebanese and Vietnamese communities. And, just purely on a point of cuisine, we had one of the great varieties of cuisines from all over the place. Not so much African, not so much, a little bit of South American, but European and Middle Eastern food and Asian food.
Yeah, yeah.
Southeast Asian food, especially Thai, Indonesian, Vietnamese. And, we have a folklorico where we have kind of traditional performances from all different kinds of countries. I think we started to celebrate the multicultural change in Australian society probably by the 1970s, and that made it much more interesting.
See, that's what they need to do in my hometown.
Right.
But they have the Bradford Mila,
right,
in the park, but it's not happening.
Is there a separation between the South Asian community and the white British community?
That's the reason the first house I grew up in West Bowling, the only reason we moved out is because the Asians were moving in.
Right.
So we kind of moved away from it, and then a lot of Asians were moving in, and then we had to. So my childhood was basically moving 3 times further and further away from the city centre because the Asians were buying up the houses.
That sounds like Americans, where you have African Americans moving into the inner city and the white people going further and further out into the outer suburbs and gated communities and stuff like that.
I would say to me, well, why can't we just stay here and just get to know these people? Oh, they don't want to mix with us.
Exactly.
But that's what everybody was saying.
Exactly.
My mum didn't know any better.
Yeah.
It's
exactly
the opposite. I remember the fella who were buying our house came to the door, and my mum wouldn't even fucking speak to him.
He was Pakistani?
Yeah, she wouldn't even speak to him, and he was saying, can you just sign this? And then she said, I just signed it and told him to chew.
Right.
So she signed it, and then he came back and she'd fucking signed a contract saying you've got to leave carpet and curtains and everything. So we had to leave it all because she just wouldn't read what he'd got. She just wanted him away from the door. I went fucking bananas.
Serves her right for not reading the contract. What a stupid thing to do.
Asian people knew this. Asian people knew white people were
scared. But wasn't there an agent between you and the buyer?
He just came at the door.
But was that the agent who came to the door, or the actual
it was
buyer?
the fella that were buying it.
Oh, so it was like a private sale.
But we'd gone through estate agents, but they were buying the house, but he wanted my mum to sign this, so then my mum had to leave the carpets and the curtains and
they
everything.
wanted the fittings.
Yeah. But the Pakistanis knew
Tricky,
that
aren't
white
they?
people they knew that white people were scared.
Right.
They didn't want to fucking speak to them, so
right.
It came and everybody was doing. They were all doing it.
Take advantage of it. Yeah.
And I remember we went back to visit a neighbour, and my mum sent me down there to get the post if any post had come. And I remember going, and I must have been about 6, and he said, "Oh, come in, sit down," and then he'd sit down next to it. If the fella put his hand on my knee, and I went, "I'm going."
Right.
I just left. Oh, there's no post. But it's 70s.
Right.
You know. It was weird. It was a weird thing.
That does sound weird.
Yeah, but like I said, they wouldn't even leave the city to go live somewhere else.
Right.
I don't know why, but like you say, we both love travelling.
Yeah.
But to come from complete opposite sides of the spectrum from getting that, because my parents didn't do it and your parents did.
Right.
I did it because I didn't want to end up like that.
Right. Well, we started out in a probably a fairly white middle class suburb in London.
Yeah.
Opposite a park, a nice place to live, and we moved to a city which, in the late 50s was still fairly white, and the areas we lived in were fairly middle class. It wasn't like there was a lot of contact with non-British communities in both locations. It was only later when I moved into the city to go to university, and suddenly I was very close to Chinatown, very close to the Italian community, and Lebanese, and the Lebanese. There's a Lebanese area near the center of the city. I discovered Lebanese food and thought, my God, why wasn't I eating this 20 years ago? This is spectacular. I mean, Arabic food I just love.
Were you travelling to stay at home, or were you living on campus?
No, I got a share house. We
Right.
had a 7-bedroom house with 7 people in it.
Wow.
And we just shared a kitchen and a bathroom.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
One kitchen, it was party time.
Yeah.
We didn't do much studying the first year or so.
That sounds like, especially in Sydney.
Yeah.
Especially, that sounds like a fucking right load of fun.
It was fantastic. It was a great time. It was almost too much fun because my academic level probably dropped in that first couple of years, especially. But I was working on the university newspaper, and I was doing a lot of other things apart from being in the classroom, listening to lectures.
So how long were it before when your mum and your stepdad said, right, we'll fucking stay?
Right.
How many years were you there for?
I think they decided to stay pretty soon after they arrived. I think they had a good feeling about Sydney.
Yeah.
We stayed in a private hotel very close to the centre of the city for the first couple of weeks, and then we moved to Randwick, which is famous for there's a big race course in Randwick. We lived there for a short period of time, and then I think my mum got this job with an estate agent. No, sorry, we moved to Balgala, north of the harbour, close to the beach. I think they wanted to see what it was like to live near the beach because Sydney was so famous for its beaches. And that's where my mother met the estate agent who offered her a job, and that was out in the northwestern suburbs, inland.
Yeah.
And that's where we moved, and that's where I stayed until I was about 18 and moved to the centre of the city to be close to Sydney University. So basically we lived in a couple of places for a short time and then for a long time. I guess from the age of about 6 to 18, I was in the Hills district, either Borkham Hills, Castle Hill, northwest Sydney.
I just love to go back to the 70s and just give me mum and dad a check.
Right.
To say, come on. I've never been abroad with them.
Right.
Never. My mother couldn't understand why I was going to travel around the world. It couldn't compute with her.
Yeah, well, my mum had travelled a bit. She'd She went to Switzerland for her honeymoon. I think she'd probably
Right.
been to France. She mostly spent most of her young life in England. But
This were her first time outside Europe.
yeah. And my dad had travelled a bit in Europe. He'd been to also the honeymoon in Switzerland, but he'd been with his mates travelling around Europe a little bit.
Yeah.
And Charlie had been my stepdad. He was running an army physical training camp in Egypt.
Yeah.
Claimed to be running up and down the pyramids, which was an absolute lie. You can't run up and down the pyramids. They're gigantic stone blocks. You climb them or you don't go there at all. So he'd had, with the British Army, he'd had some wartime experience in North Africa. So they'd done a little bit of travelling, but Egypt was as far out as either of them had been.
Yeah.
They'd certainly never been across through Asia or to Australia. It was another world.
You wouldn't have sailed straight to Sydney, would you?
No.
So why did they decide? Where would you have stopped first?
Basically, you go from the stops were Naples, and then through the Mediterranean, and then at the north of the Suez Canal, Port Said, which is a port city in Egypt. And it's right at the entrance to the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
Through the canal, and then we were supposed to go down through the canal along through the Red Sea, and then at the southeastern entrance to the Red Sea is Yemen.
Yeah.
And at that time, the south part of Yemen was the colony of Aden, which was a British colony still in the late 50s. But there'd been anti-British riots, there'd been all kinds of instability in Aden, and it was decided that it was too dangerous for a British passenger ship to stop there.
Yeah.
So we went to the southwestern side of the Red Sea entrance, which was Djibouti. Which is in French Somaliland, which was also a port city. But apparently at that time it was safer for a British ship to go to Djibouti than it was to go to Aden. And then across the Indian Ocean to Colombo, in what was then Ceylon.
Sri Lanka.
Yeah, now Sri Lanka, changed the name later. Yeah. At that time, independent Ceylon.
Yeah.
And then the entry point in Australia was Perth, and then from Perth across to Adelaide, and then Melbourne, and finally Sydney.
So those three, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney. So your mum and stepdad would have got off, had a stroll around.
In each place
and
we
thought,
stopped.
Oh, this isn't for me.
They almost stopped in Perth.
Did they?
Yeah, they had a very good feeling about Perth.
Right.
Perth at that time, it's just a few 100,000 people. It's a small city. There's a river running through the town.
Swan River.
Yeah, the Swan River with black swans. I mean, Jesus, black swans was unbelievable. There's a big park. It had apparently a really lovely feeling, but they wanted to see the other cities before they made a decision.
Because you could have gone back, couldn't you?
Yeah, quite possible. You could just jump on a ship coming back the other way.
Yeah.
So we did a stopover, probably a day or two, maybe just a 1 day stopover in Perth, and then another day in Adelaide.
Did you drop anchor at Fremantle?
Yeah. In fact, off the coast, there's an anchorage just off the coast. We're talking a big ship. The Orion was a full size passenger ship, built in the 1930s. It wasn't one of the newer and larger boats, but it was big enough not to be able to go into inner harbours anywhere. Yeah. It always, anchored off, and we'd get a ferry or whatever was available to go into the actual port. Adelaide, we had another stopover.
So they didn't fancy Adelaide or Melbourne?
I don't have a clear memory, but it was like we're going to go as far as Sydney and then make a decision. Had a day in Melbourne. I'm pretty sure we went to the MCG. Where I think there's a little museum or kind of a public area outside the stadium, and then Sydney. And Sydney's got that grand entrance. You come into the harbour and there's the two headlands on either side, and you sail up the harbour and there's this giant coat hanger of a bridge, which in those days the Orion sailed under the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Yeah, it was it wasn't so big. The big liners now,
Yeah.
there's no way they can get under. They stop
They
near,
stop before, don't they, by Circular Quay?
near Circular Quay. But in those days, you could actually sail under the harbour bridge,
Yeah.
and the dock was in Walsh Bay, which is just through the bridge and kind of
Darling Harbour.
turned to the south towards Darling Harbour.
Yeah.
Darling Harbour's now closed off. It's become a kind of recreation area. But I think once we'd arrived in Sydney and seen the bridge and the harbour and everything else, and also as you're tracking up from the south, it's like beach, headland, beach, headland, beach. Oh, this looks all right, and they're all this golden sandy beaches. It's a sandstone geology.
Yeah.
So the beaches are it's this golden, beautiful golden sand.
So you'd have turned up and gone past Newcastle then, wouldn't you?
No, Newcastle is to the north.
To
You
the
go
north, that's
you go
right.
past Wollongong.
That's right, yeah.
And Wollongong, Sydney's got a very strange geology. Under Sydney is this great seam of coal,
Yeah.
but it's way down at Sydney, and it comes up to the surface in Wollongong,
Yeah.
which became an industrial steel port, and Newcastle to the north, which is again it's coal-rich industrial steel making. So you've got these two big industrial port cities, Wollongong and Newcastle, safely distant from Sydney. And then you've got the city of Sydney, which has some industry, but compared to Wollongong and Newcastle, not so much, which is, it's a healthy thing.
But I've been out, I didn't sail into Sydney, but I've been out to that headland, and then you sort of look in and it's just like you're pulling the curtains back and then you've got this,
it's gorgeous.
The best ever film you've seen.
Yeah.
And it's just...
And the two headlands are quite different. North Head is this very high cliffs, and there's almost a straight drop down to the rocks below and the harbour. And South Head's kind of this gently sloping headland with the very, very, probably the most expensive suburbs in Sydney. Vaucluse especially is, Rose Bay, all these kind of multi-million-dollar mansions.
Up there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the big money is in that area. But yeah, and when we kind of settled in Balgala for a couple of years, and that's very close to Manly. And from Manly you can take a ferry, which basically goes just inside North Head, and from Manly you kind of sail across just inside the heads, and you get the sea swell, so the Manly ferry can be really rough. And then the Manly ferry will take you all the way into Circular Quay. And it's a great ride. A lovely way to go to the city.
I worked in Manly for about a month, and I used to take that ferry.
Right.
And coming home at night, you just see people on the ferry who've done it a million times, just reading paper. Oh, what are you doing?
Right.
The fucking whole city's lit up. Opera House. It's fucking gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, it's like when I first got on the train in Zushi. I'd be looking at everything in Kamakura and Kita Kamakura for the first 6 months or so, and after that, I'd be kind of, I'd be looking at the paper. You get used to it.
You get used to it.
Unless it's a change of season, like if it's sakura season or momiji season, you've got beautiful leaves or blossoms. It's like anything. You do it long enough, and it starts to lose its magic.
I mean,
unfortunately.
But Zushi is the place, out of all the places I've lived in the world, even as a kid, that I've lived the longest.
Yeah.
I mean, I did live in Bradford for the first 16 years of my life, but it wasn't in the same place.
No, me too. I've lived 30 years in Zushi.
Wow.
But not in the same house. The longest place I lived was in Zushi Shinjuku.
Yeah.
Which was my family home when my kids were young. We lived there for about 15 years, I guess. That's the longest I've ever been in one house. And Zushi's the longest I've been in one locality.
But it's just a fucking great place to bring your kids up.
Oh, it is.
I mean, Shima had not been to my hometown.
Right.
Because she was thinking, shall we live in England? I said, well, let me show you my hometown. And she said, fucking not living here.
Zushi's got just about everything. It's close to the sea, it's close to the forest, it's close enough to the city so you can commute to Tokyo if you need to.
But have your kids got street smarts?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Even when they're over in foreign countries?
Emmy particularly because when she was 15, she went off to high school in Sydney. And although she was staying with
Has
friends
she been
of
robbed
ours,
while she's been abroad? Has she been robbed while she's been abroad?
Not sure. I think she might have been.
Mm.
She's. I mean, she went to. She had an Italian class. She went to stay in Italy for a while.
All right, okay.
She's travelled in Bali with a bunch of friends. She's living in Paris. Gino's not as street smart. He's mostly been in Japan. Or when my kids were young, we used to travel fairly regularly. We'd go back to Australia to see my mum, or we'd go to Bali or Hawaii or wherever it happened to be.
I'm going to have to...
London, Italy.
Because my kids are getting a bit older now, I'm going to have to take them to slightly dodgier places so they know what the crack is.
Sure.
Because here you don't get it, do you? It's like living in Pleasantville.
Yeah, it is.
You can... I left my GoPro camera on the steps of... Do you know where that sun statue
Yeah, on the beach.
Yeah, I left it on the steps there, fucked off for a kayak, and I thought, where's my camera? Went back. 2 hours later.
Still there.
Anywhere else in the world,
it's gone.
Apart from here, it's fucking gone. Yeah.
The only thing you're likely to lose, or the things you're most likely to lose here in Zissy or in Japan, are umbrellas and bicycles.
Yeah.
They're the two most commonly stolen. And the bicycles are often just some kid realises there's an unlocked bike and go for a joyride, and then he'll dump it in a back alley, half a kilometre away.
But with murders, kids coming home from school late at night on the train, you don't have to worry, do you?
Right. Exactly.
I
remember when Emmy moved to Sydney, my friends in Sydney, who I've known most of my life, or since high school anyway, they said to me, Emmy wants to go out with her friends at night, and we're telling her to come back early, and she doesn't like it. And I said to them, she's 15, give her a bit of freedom. And they said, Sydney's not the same as when you were a kid.
Yeah,
Sydney has become quite dangerous. And they said, we don't want to make the phone call to you to let you know that your daughter's disappeared or she's been, mugged or raped or whatever it is. And I eventually thought, maybe it's changed. Because when I was younger, Sydney was relatively safe.
Yeah.
I think it's become as cities get bigger, they become badder, basically.
But this place, my years here, this place doesn't seem to be changing, which is a good thing.
A little bit more high rise, a little bit more crowded on the streets, a little bit more traffic jams in the centre.
But dangerous wise,
no change at all.
No.
I've never seen a fight on the street in Zish.
I've just seen people being pissed up in summer fighting in the bars.
Oh, really?
That's it, yeah. Couple of times
on the beach bars.
On the beach.
Oh, yeah, I've seen trouble on the beach.
That's it.
But that's not Zishi people.
No.
That's
people coming
that's
in and
idiots
getting
from Tokyo, Yokohama that don't know any better.
Yeah.
City people, and they think because they're down here, they're away from their family or their work or whatever it is, they can behave like idiots just because they think they're on holiday when nobody's watching. And they'll leave broken bottles on the beach or plastic bags or all this. I get really upset with the city people that come down here and treat the beach like a garbage dump and treat the whole area like a playground where they have no responsibility. I think a little bit more sense of space, a little bit more sense of public responsibility would go down well.
Well, that's. I want to get you on again because I'm gonna have to do one soon. But I want to record you again on how you got here next time.
Okay, we can do that
because with me with the tsunami in Thailand and all that shit. But the next one is how you got here.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to?
No, we maybe could have spoken a little bit more about different ports of call, and I could say a little bit more about the Suez business because that was very geopolitical.
Yeah.
That was kind of the Suez crisis and the anti-British riots and all that kind of stuff. And
did you feel danger as a kid going through that? Yeah.
We were spat on in Port Said. Now I don't remember that personally, but my parents said to me, they said, we went out on the street in Port Said and we were spat on, and we came back to the boat as soon as possible. But, it's only, the Suez crisis is 55, we're in early 59, it's only 4 years later. And, at that time there was this pan-Arabist, I think Egypt had actually aligned with Syria to create this kind of pan-Arabic alliance. There was a huge anti-colonial movement. Independence had come to a lot of African countries, 58, 59, 60. It's all changing.
But if you were stuck on that boat for so long, weeks at a time, and then you get to a port, how long were you in the port for?
A day or two.
A day or two.
And in many cases, you were allowed a day to get off the boat and go and tour the city. I don't think Port Said had as much to offer as, say, Napoli, where you've got Pompeii and the Amalfi Coast and all the churches and the Roman stuff. I mean, Napoli's a fantastic first port of call. Port Said is a very poor second.
But your mum and your stepdad were having none of it, and it was back to the fucking boat.
Back to the boat, they thought, because maybe they didn't understand the political situation. They would have been aware that there was a Suez crisis. They would have been aware that there was actually, Port Said was a war zone. There was actually French and British troops arrived to try to secure the canal, which had been nationalised by NASA. And so we were on the tail end of that. And, we were a fair target. We represented the British Empire. And the British Empire was very much out of favour. And then when we got to the other end of the canal and the Red Sea, we realised, we're supposed to go to Aden. Why aren't we going to Aden? We can't go to Aden because there's anti-British riots. It's dangerous.
So it was all around that area that we weren't liked then,
Exactly, because basically the British controlled the canal. Because the canal was the route between British India and Ceylon and Malaya and even Zanzibar down in Africa through to Europe and through to England. And the British used the Suez Canal more than any other country. So they had a lot of... And also there was the passenger route to Australia, New Zealand. So... when that was nationalised by NASA, by this very strongly nationalist, pro-Arab rights government in Egypt, the British actually sent a force of troops in to try and maintain control of the canal. It was a very heavy time to be sailing through the canal.
But it didn't work. They got beat, didn't they?
They basically withdrew. The United Nations stepped in and basically enforced. They used peacekeepers. I think they came from Denmark. They enforced international rights to sail through the canal. It couldn't be controlled by Egypt because Egypt actually sunk ships in Port Said to close the canal, and the ships had to be hauled out, and the canal had to be cleared before it could be used again. And this was like 55, 56, and we're there in, February, March 59. It's not long after. And, we're at the very end of the passenger ship era anyway. Because by the early 60s, people start flying. It was expensive. But it was much faster, much more convenient.
I mean, you could have flew then, couldn't you?
We could have, but it was prohibitively expensive. And I think the romance of a cruise halfway around the world, we're going to Europe, and then we're going to Africa, and then we're going to Asia, and then we're going to Australia.
I still think a ship or a train is better than a plane.
Absolutely.
Much better.
Trains are fantastic. I travelled all over India by train, and you just sit there, and it's just a smooth ride. And you're looking out the window at the changing scene.
The hours just sail by.
It's fabulous. And likewise with the ship. I think maybe if you're an adult, it probably gets a little bit boring after a while. When you're out to sea, there's just the sea, but you get the occasional pot of dolphins or flying fish, and then whenever there's a port of call, of course, you've got all the landscape as you come in, and the stopovers are very exciting.
So you can't remember being that bored then when you were on the ship?
I used to run around the deck.
Yeah.
That was one of my daily rituals. And Charlie was a sportsman with a stopwatch.
Yeah.
So he used to time me. And I remember playing deck quoits,
Yeah.
throwing these kind of little rope
Yeah.
circles into a kind of concentric circle target.
Yeah.
I learned to play chess. Probably during the tropical section, it gets too hot to do anything.
So everybody went inside.
Everyone goes inside and starts playing, chess and bingo and whatever the indoor games were at the time. There were a lot of activities going on the ship.
See, that can't happen now, can it?
Yeah, and then probably the toughest part of the journey was to the north and the south of the Suez Canal. I think by the time we got to Ceylon, it was much more kind of colourful, tropical. We went to a cricket match and watched these lunatics out in their all whites playing cricket in the middle of the day. It must have been 45 degrees. I just couldn't believe people were out in the sun.
But they were used to it, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were used to it.
I remember we were at this cricket match and we were right next to the scorer, and I picked up one of the numbers, the scoreboard numbers, and it was like picking up molten steel. It burnt my hand.
Did your hand sizzle?
Yeah, I mean the metal plate was in the sun, and I picked it up. And, Mommy, what's happened to me? Yeah, that's a first-hand memory again.
Yeah,
that doesn't come from the movie.
Yeah.
It's just. I remember the burn mark on my hand.
It's always the negative stuff that you remember.
It's strange, isn't it? Or the dramatic stuff you remember.
Yeah.
The dramatic views, or the sailing under the harbour bridge, thinking, it's going to knock the funnel off the top of the ship.
See, I always think of the Sydney Harbour Bridge being way up high, but it's been so long that if I go back, it's not that much now.
Yeah.
It's not that much.
I've climbed to the top, actually. I did it before they had bridge climb. I just climbed it. A mate of mine, after a party one night, he said, "Hey, you want to go to the top of the harbour bridge?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So we drove down to the bottom of the pylon, the big stone block that holds the thing up, and we go to this stairway with a kind of a iron spikes and barbed wire, and he gets a couple of sacks out and throws them over the barbed wire. We just climb over, and then we're on the stairway and we're on the way up.
So there wouldn't have been any sort of security there then when you did that?
Very little.
No?
Very little. I mean, there might have been a drive-by every hour or something like that.
But in 2002, you just see it like little ants going up all the time.
Yeah.
All the fucking time.
Yeah, well, this was before bridge climb. No one went on the bridge except the painters, who were, it was a permanent job. Paul Hogan, later Crocodile Dundee, was a painter on the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Because
that was his job before he became a TV comedian.
The painters always had the Orient Hotel as their local.
Right.
They were all sitting there boozing when I was there.
Yeah,
because that were on one of my pub crawls.
He would have been there for sure, cracking jokes, and that's probably where he met someone, a producer of a TV show. Eventually got a spot on a kind of a current affairs show.
Yeah.
And he was the comic relief on the current affairs. He used to talk about current affairs, but in his usual kind of...
And he never looked back.
No prisoners style. And then, eventually got the Crocodile Dundee gig and became a, international icon, basically.
Yeah.
Representing outback Australia.
And he were a bridge painter.
Yeah, he was a Sydney boy. Yeah, but, became identified as, the outback larrikin, basically.
Right then, Dil, I've got a wedding to go to.
Fine.
So I'm going to have to. I'd like to stay longer actually, but I'm going to have to.
No problem.
But we'll get the Zushi one in later then, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
That was most interesting. I've managed to conjure up a few more memories that I hadn't.
That's fine.